Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Today on the show, we are talking about ISTP careers. You, as an ISTP, listening or watching, what's your career path? What's the best career for you? I don't think we can tell you that, but we can give you some principles to choose a career that might be in alignment with your personality type. And we have a particular way we want to do this today. This discussion came about because we're in the middle of running our Personality Life Path Mentorship Program. This is a program where we look at all of the 8 cognitive functions, the Jungian cognitive functions, and the energies they represent. We take one per week, we understand it, we look at it with our clients, our students, and we find the association of that function in the real world for your personality type and how you're wired. And it's designed to help people find their life path. So a program that's designed for people to find their life path often attracts people in the middle of transition. They're transitioning something in their life. Maybe it's a relationship. Often it's a career. It's the thing that we do 40 hours or more a week to feed ourselves, to clothe ourselves, to provide for ourselves and our family and the people that depend on us. Our careers are very important. And so it's a focal point of a lot of people in our class right now. They're talking about career movement, whether it's a new career, reinventing the one they already have, something around this that is a focal point. And I think it's also in the common conversation as well. I don't think it's just our class. I think a lot of people right now, you listening, you might be in this boat. Are you reevaluating the career that you've had and maybe wanting to do something different?
Yeah, I think it's in the zeitgeist right now. People are reevaluating careers, career paths, what's right for them, what they want to be doing.
Yeah.
There's that whole concept of quiet quitting. So yeah, I do. I think it's in the collective unconscious.
Well, for the ISTP that's watching or listening, Antonia, let's talk about some of the principles of how we approach career thinking, at least one way we approach it. And we've identified that an ISTP is an ISTP is an ISTP. But there's 4 flavors that an ISTP might show up as. I mean, there's probably more than that, but we've identified primarily 4 different types or styles of ISTPs. And we believe that if you can understand which one of these styles that you show up as, that's going to give you some information to make the best decision about a career path going forward.
So this is built off of the work of our friend, Dr. Dario Nardi, who has been, over the last couple of years, diving into this concept of subtypes of each of the types. Some of these terms are borrowed from Dr. Viktor Galenko, whose work is in socionics, and a little bit from Dr. Helen Fisher, who has done some work with neurotransmitters and how our attraction or relationship to different neurotransmitters shows up in our behaviors and our character traits. So these 4 different subtypes are 4 different ways that ISTPs can manifest. Like you said, an ISTP is going to be an ISTP, meaning that you're still going to have the same functional, cognition. You're still going to have the character traits that come along with that. But it's going to be a little different depending upon how your mind was molded with your life experiences and particularly after the age of 25, your career choice. So the way this shows up is that the thing we spend, like you said, Joel, over 40 hours a week doing is it's going to influence the sort of the style that we show up with within, whatever our natural talents are.
Yeah.
It forces us to build different skill sets to meet our careers or the thing that we're doing so often in the middle. And that means that our subtype, which is more nurture than nature, basically that's what I'm getting to. Seems like our personality type is pre-wired. It seems like we don't really get a choice in that. And it seems like the best information we have right now indicates that our personality type is something that we're born with.
Yeah.
But our subtype or our flavor is something that emerges over time. And I think Dario was really reluctant to use the word subtype because he didn't want people thinking that you get shoehorned into a style and you can't get out of it. Because this is more nurture-oriented, you actually have some flexibility. You can be one subtype at a certain point in your life and then find yourself developing the characteristics and traits of a different subtype. So your career choice is important, not just to match your type to your career and make sure it's, something that's going to be in alignment with your natural talents, but it's important because it's also going to mold you.
Yeah.
It's going to influence how your type shows up. And so career is both something that we use type to understand what career path we should go towards, but we can also use different career paths to help mold our personality and make ourselves a little more flexible.
So some of that's going to become very clear as we unpack these subtypes in a moment, but let's focus on the stereotypes in ISTPs, or at least what I consider the common list of ISTP careers. If you went to the internet, I went to the internet, did some research. So I came up with a top 10 list, according to the internet, of ISTP careers. Number 1, mechanic. Number 2, athlete. Number 3, carpenter. 4, computer programmer or systems analyst. 5, web developer. 6, electrician or plumber. I'm assuming any other style of those as well as number 6. 7, detective. 8, special forces operator. 9, emergency room physician. And 10, commercial pilot. So, that's a pretty common list you'll find if you do a general search. I would argue that ISTPs have way more career and job opportunities than those listed. And some probably fit perfectly with an ISTP listening or watching right now.
Yeah, so certain subtypes are going to be very attracted to different careers on that list. Other subtypes, not so much. And then there are some, like you said, are omitted because there are subtypes of ISTPs that don't go towards what we think of as the stereotypical careers for them.
Yeah, so let's talk about these 4 subtypes. I'm going to give you the list if you're following along. The names of these 4 flavors or subtypes of ISTP personality is the dominant, the creative, the normalizing, and the harmonizing. And each one of these is a differently expressed ISTP. These are not new personality types. These are just expressions of the ISTP type.
Right. And as we go through them, we'll make sure that these are really accessible. Mm-hmm. So if you're new to type, you've just discovered you have ISTP preferences, we're not going to go so far down the rabbit's hole that we'll lose you. We're going to try to keep this really, something that you can understand at sort of its simplest component. But if you are a type geek and you like all the technical terms, we'll also put a little bit of that in, but I'll warn you each and every time.
Yeah. So let's talk about the dominant first. What does a dominant ISTP look like?
So the dominant ISTP has a tendency to be more managerial and leadership focused. They may not always be in leadership or management, but they always have a sense of confidence. They have fast reactions time. They trust themselves and their experiences, and they're people who make the most of any situation. They're smart. They're tactical. They have learned how to be in charge, basically. And so they're more dominant, right? They have more of an energy of assertiveness, and as opposed to seeking power, I have a feeling that people sort of start to follow them. They look behind themselves and discover that people are behind them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So unlike other dominant subtypes that are actively looking for managerial or positions of power or leadership positions, I have a feeling that these ISTPs just find themselves there.
Yeah. Okay. So what jobs would they maybe cluster toward, or careers would this style of ISTP look toward?
Well, because they're really good with problem solving, because they have that confidence and that capacity to build leadership skills, they also have good verbal and visual spatial skills, language-based reasoning, and they're usually pretty well socialized. So meaning that if you have the stereotype of an ISTP that is antisocial, it would not be the dominant ISTP. But despite that, they're still going to be quiet and contemplative. They're just going to have better social skills than others. And because of that, they end up being good in positions of administration, business, science, technology. And oftentimes, like I said, they just kind of find themselves in positions of leadership, management, and training, right? Oftentimes they'll find themselves in a position where they're training other people to do things. And they are commonly found in the military. The trick is, though, unlike other dominant subtypes, like some dominant subtypes need to make their own thing, so they're more entrepreneurial and create their own business and want scale. Others do best when they're in a structure that really creates a good platform for them. This ISTP can thrive anywhere as long as there's some flexibility to it. So as long as they can really find a place with room to make their own decisions.
Yeah.
That's the key. So they'll take on pretty much almost any position that requires that in charge demeanor, that ability to make those fast decisions and problem solve, and they'll play nice with others as long as there's some room for them to determine how they want to go about that.
I'm thinking right now of two ISTPs that are both co-founders / CEOs of companies. One is a Fortune 500 company, a really big company. The other is a smaller, I wouldn't say it's a small business, but it's a much smaller company than Fortune 500. Both of them are good with people, like connecting with people in a social way. Mm-hmm. But both of these ISTPs have a hard time with intimacy and like one-on-one connection. I notice they can lead people, but that interpersonal like connection part feels like a real challenge for them.
Yeah, well, I think they're still going to be introverts, of course. But the other thing is, or component to this dominant subtype, is that they're kind of hard to persuade or sway in any way.
Yeah.
They have a lot of confidence in their firsthand experience, in their knowledge and information. They have a high degree of certainty. And so because of that, they tend to, they're hard for other people to persuade. And that probably means that they're also hard to interface with in some way, like in a personal way.
Yeah.
That said, they usually are very good at getting things done. They're really good at putting their knowledge into sort of practical results, right? Yeah. They're really good at creating tangible results. And they are particularly good at being persistent, right? They're really, really persistent. And so eventually, like you said, they can be at the top of Fortune 500 companies, their own company that they started, because they just have that groundedness and that persistence and that unswayability.
I think the word that comes up for me for the dominant ISTP is resourceful. Mm-hmm. They don't have to have all the resources to start the project. They don't have to have it all like dialed in first. They can start moving toward the thing they want, attuning to that, and be resourceful along the way to get there.
Yeah. One note that Dario mentions is that hobbies and activities are very important. So if you are a dominant ISTP, your career is not going to be enough. Yeah. Right. So even if you're a person who's like spending 80 hours a week on your career, maybe you do have a company you started, or you're an entrepreneur, or just somebody who's a manager managing like a series of restaurant chains, who knows? You're still going to need a hobby. And he said, ideally athletics, a craft, or immersing in nature. So you're not going to feel right and balanced unless you have an outside hobby outside of your career.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the technical stuff for the type geeks following along. Briefly, let's touch base on this. From a chemical or neurotransmitter side, this is going to be the subtype that's associated with testosterone the most, and the functions of this personality type. So the driver or dominant cognitive function for ISTPs is introverted thinking or accuracy. That's what we've nicknamed it here at Personality Hacker. And the co-pilot or auxiliary is going to be extroverted sensing, or what we call sensation. How are these attuned? There's a reason why there are dominant ISTPs, because the attunement of these two cognitive functions has a particular, attitude toward it. Not attitude, I guess that's the wrong word I should use.
That's a technical term.
But attunement, I guess attunement's a good way to say it.
Yeah, so each of the cognitive functions has a capacity to be really focused and kind of assertive, assert their energy outward, and almost have blinders on because it has so much purpose to it, or so much assertion. And that's called an analytic way of expressing that function. And then there's a more holistic way, and that is more diffused energy, a broader territory. You take in more peripheral, and it's a little bit more receptive, but it's not, it doesn't get as much done because it's not as assertive, but it sees a bigger picture. And in the dominant ISTP subtype, both the functions that you just mentioned, both the introverted thinking accuracy or an extroverted sensing sensation, they both have an analytic preference. And that's one of the reasons why they're so persistent. And
they're dominant. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we talked about dominant. Now we got creative, normalizing, harmonizing. Let's go to creative next. What does a creative ISTP look like?
So this might be in people's mind a little closer to what they think of when they think of ISTPs. The dominant, I wouldn't be surprised if dominant ISTPs sometimes mistype as judgers, right? Possibly even ISTJs or ESTJs, possibly even NTJs. This is a more creative version that synthesizes information. It's more open, holistic framed. It's more intuitive. There's like more of an intuitive bent here. And it's this subtype is going to be very curious. They're going to be curious. They're going to have a lot of different interests. They're going to be naturals at design, and their creations will be intriguing to other people. They have a tendency to synthesize all of their information with prior observations and use frameworks in order to figure it all out. And that's what gives them that sort of intuitive bent, because they're patterning based on what they've already seen before. That said, regardless of any other component, they have a toolkit of tricks that's worked in the past. And so they tend to, they're looking for leverage using tricks that they have already determined. So they're field testing ways of getting around things and figuring things out and finding leverage points. And then they continue to add that toolkit to all of the situations they find themselves in. So that's sort of the creative element to it, that they're tinkerers in some way. Like they're always trying to figure things out, and that tinkerer mindset makes it so that they can problem solve in innovative ways, not just apply what they've already learned, but apply what they learned synthesized with new information. And they're very visual. They notice visual and behavioral patterns. They can get really kind of goal focused on visual things, like particularly visual detail, which makes them really good with precision visual work.
Yeah.
And they have a tendency to, they're challenged with communicating clearly their ideas, but they really enjoy stimulating conversation. So they are much better at listening than they are at talking. That said, in their area of expertise, they can become good teachers. They just have to have a situation that allows them some precision in communication, because it's also complex. It's hard to communicate, right? Especially if they're really visually oriented.
Yeah.
So this lends them to becoming exceptional designers, right? Design is the clear path for creative ISTPs. And they are really good at bringing in artistic, systemic, and visual spatial thinking to everything they're doing. So the careers they tend to find themselves in are architecture, computer simulations, game design, fashion, financial modeling, horticulture, industrial product design, landscaping, and anything in the visual or mechanical arts.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at this already. The word nimble came up to mind when you said this. They're very nimble subtype, meaning they can flex and flow probably into all sorts of different roles and different responsibilities that are pulled upon. Like they can probably go and do different things. A jack of all trades, ISTP, which ISTPs already are a little bit jack of all trades. This one probably is the most of all 4 subtypes. And from that list as well, a lot of those types of jobs are less about going and getting a job 9 to 5. A lot of those are more independent contractor type jobs. Like I'm going to do this for a season or a project or for a period of time. I'm going to come together, do this, and then I'll break apart from that and go do something else. More like free agents.
Yeah.
And so I think that this subtype lends itself, if you're thinking about a career path for you as an ISTJ, think about platforms. Think about maybe like different platforms, whether it's the Uber Uber driver platform where you can drive a vehicle and get paid for the time you put in and you can set your own hours, all the way up to maybe YouTube videos or music on SoundCloud or something. These are platforms that free you to be creative, whatever that is, to make money and resources your career, but you don't have to go and clock in and clock out on a schedule.
Right.
I think all ISTPs are going to lend themselves not to wanting to go clock in and clock out on a schedule. I'd say this subtype the most, though, doesn't want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and Daria even mentions, ideally, if they get a position that's really ideal to the subtype, they're actually going to be able to move around a lot.
Yeah.
They'll be able to move around in their workspace. They'll be able to travel, maybe visiting different, client sites or something to that effect. And there's a need to be in motion, right? There's a need to be able to move around a lot. I think travel, not just travel for work, but actual global travel is very important for this kind of subtype.
Yeah.
Creative subtypes tend to have a thirst for information. And Dario doesn't mention that thirst for information, but I think it's because ISTPs already have a thirst for information, so it might not be necessarily noteworthy. But I've noticed that all the creative subtypes for all of the personality types, the creative is the one that almost you can't sate their appetite. And the more travel they do, the better their general thought process gets. So I think for ISTPs, The creative subtype needs a couple different things. First, they need to be in nature, right? Nature is really important, whether they're like just doing something as simple as gardening or taking big hikes. And the other one is travel.
Yeah.
Getting around, moving around, being viscerally in these experiences. It's very important for them.
So this subtype's associated with dopamine more than the other subtypes. And let's talk about the attunement of the functions. How are their cognitive functions showing up?
So for creative subtypes, the perceiving function, in this case, it would be extroverted sensing or sensation. That's going to have the analytic bent, meaning that that's going to be the more focused, the more assertive, the more pushing out energy. And the judging function, in this case, introverted thinking or accuracy, that's going to be the more holistic. It's going to be a little bit more diffused, a little bit more open, sees a bigger territory, and not as insistent. And that makes sense, right? Like there's going to be a lot more of a desire to be creative and expressive with the perceiving function than there is going to be a sense of this is how things have to happen with the judging function.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about dominant, creative. Now, when we're talking about creative, I said ISTPs are probably not going to want to go clock in to an office and spend the 40 hours in an office 9 to 5. However, there is a subtype of ISTP, which is the normalizing subtype, which probably is the ISTP flavoring most able or likely to do that.
Yes, they are the most likely, but still they have ISTP preferences, so nobody's going to... I mean, none of the ISTP subtypes particularly loves clocking in and clocking out.
Sure.
But this is the subtype that fits pretty well into general society. There's less of a sense of, a lack of socialization. These ISTPs tend to be, pretty well socialized and have a decent time engaging and interacting with other people, even though they're still introverts, just like the dominant, right? They're still introverted types. And so they might not be the life of the party, but they're going to have like a capacity to interact and engage in a pretty decent way. They are usually experts in a specific trade. That is the normalizing, this is how I am a good member of society, right? I'm doing my civic duty by being very good at a specific trade and developing strong expertise there. And basically, it's done by taking everything the senses brings in and kicking it to the back of the brain for thorough consideration. So they're the most thoughtful of the ISTPs. And ISTPs already have a tendency to be fairly thoughtful type. This is going to be the most thoughtful of the 4 subtypes. They have a lot of language-based reasoning. They also have a lot of physical skills, which is unsurprising. They tend to be the most step-by-step and linear of the ISTPs. They check their thinking as they go at a slower pace. This is how they build that expertise. And they are attracted usually to conventional service jobs that require a lot of technical skill because they are able to master the intricacies of these kinds of jobs. And if they can use their hands or move around, all the better. They don't have to, but that's ideal. So you can see them in careers like becoming an accountant, an athlete, a biologist, a computer programmer, garage mechanic, lab technician, nature photographer, web marketer, like any of these things that require increased levels of expertise and being very thoughtful as they set the situation up. And what's interesting, and this is every time we go through these subtypes, I'm like, I wonder what this subtype is mistyping themselves as. I think it's for, the dominant ISTP, I'm like, I bet they think they're judgers. And then for the creative ISTP, I'm like, I bet they think they're intuitives. For the normalizing ISTP, I'm like, I bet that they think that they are judgers as well because of that capacity to stick with something and be so thoughtful and be linear. That said, the thing that sets them apart is they are way more likely than a judger type to have a side hustle, right? You were talking about before using things like Uber as a platform.
Yeah.
This is really unique to ISTP normalizing subtype, is that they're the type most likely, even though they're normalizing, to have a side hustle, like be an Uber driver or a bicycle courier on the weekends or something to that effect.
Yeah. So there's moonlighting for this subtype, the normalizing.
Yep.
So normalizing, again, plays well with society more than the other subtypes, most likely, because there's so many opportunities in our current modern world to go get that job, to clock in, clock out, be a part of that system. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how some people are wired.
Yep.
The chemical or the neurotransmitter that's associated with is serotonin, the normalizing subtype. How does the attunement or, function look, the two dominant functions, the dominant and co-pilot or auxiliary function, how do they look for an ISTP for this subtype?
Okay, so the normalizing subtype is the opposite of the creative subtype. So in this case, it's going to be the judging function of introverted thinking, in this case accuracy, that's going to be the analytic. So that's the one that's more focused, targeted, and more tied to how the world, the judging function is tied to how the world should be, and there's usually more of an ability to focus and make things happen, along with our core principles or values. And so that's going to be the more analytic for this kind of ISTP. Whereas the perceiving function, in this case, extroverted sensing or what we call sensation, that's going to be more holistic. It's going to be a little bit more open-framed, a little less certain, or insistent on its own experiences and perspective. And this is what makes it so that this normalizing ISTP has a capacity to bring in so much sensory information, and then it's very thoughtful about that information. And that's where the expertise comes from, is the ability to not be so assertive with that extroverted sensing, like the creative type that needs to travel and needs to get out there and collect a lot of information and be do, or doing.
Yeah.
This is more of like I can gather that information with my senses, sort of be receptive to it, and then do a lot of precise thinking around it. And so the creative ISTP is going to be more likely to be have ingenuity and make these really interesting, creations, whereas the normalizing is a lot more likely to be an expert in something, an expert technician.
Okay, let's talk about the fourth and final subtype of the ISTP in relation to career. It's called the harmonizing subtype. And I would argue that this is the least stereotypical ISTP. Like, this is not how you would see research or people talk about ISTPs online, although this is a representative of this type, that people show up with a harmonizing style of ISTP all the time. Mm-hmm. How does this look?
So of the four subtypes, I think that people are less likely to see as an ISTP. I think the dominant ISTP is the one that usually throws people off. I think there's a little more space for the harmonizing ISTP, interestingly enough.
There you go.
Yeah. Not that I do think that it's a little, like, it's adjacent to the stereotypes in people's minds. But I do think that there's a little more opening for the harmonizing. It's the dominant that people are like, no, that's a judger. So the harmonizing is, this is the more sort of spiritually inclined ISTP, the one who probably thinks they're an INTJ, actually, or possibly even an INFJ. They're more hands-on and face-to-face. Yeah. They're more one-to-one than they are to, like a bigger group. Like a dominant would be more of like leading people or managing a larger group of people. The harmonizing is going to be a little bit more like we think of an introvert, more one-to-one based. But they're really focused in on sort of the complexity of human problems, right? Human challenges and problems are very interesting to them. And so they're going to apply that complex ISTP thinking to solving people problems more than they are to technical problems. And so maybe that isn't stereotypically ISTP.
Doesn't sound like it to me.
Right. But I know quite a few ISTPs that are like this, so maybe it's just an image in my head.
I would argue that a lot of ISTPs attracted to Personality Hacker.
That's true.
Our profiler training, our personality life path program, and all the things that we teach and all our courses and stuff, they tend to be this style. They tend to. Not all of them, but they tend to be this. It's a very intuitively bent ISTP.
It is, but what's so interesting about this style is that ISTPs in general tend to be specialists, right? They tend to like get really good at a certain thing. This ISTP does the same, but it's more about running mental simulations, almost like you think of with an INJ. This is why I think a lot of harmonizing ISTPs end up thinking they're INTJs. They run these mental models to see how something's going to play out, not way into the future necessarily, but sort of close, proximity to the future. And then they master sort of the complexity of human interaction and how those simulations will play out, but focused on a different area of specialty, meaning that I'm struggling to describe this ISTP because they're all so completely unique, right? They're mastering completely different things. It's like they could master interpersonal dynamic complexities, or maybe it's actually that they're mastering language, or maybe it's actually that they're mastering how something is going to play out, like people's interaction with physical things. Like if you guys all, if people all enter their cars and drive at certain speeds at certain times, this is when they're all, you know what I mean? It's like, it's very specialized to the individual.
Yeah.
And they're looking at, they're still tactical thinkers, particularly in physical or social situations, but they're really noticing cues, diagnosing, and adjusting their moves as they go. So it's not a running of a simulation to create a strategy. It's a running of a simulation, but then also just entering it tactically as well and using the cues from other people to alter how they behave. Because they're so idiosyncratic and because they're so responsive, does that make sense? It's it's hard to describe this ISTP because they have a tendency to be so responsive, and how they're responding to the environment molds who they are, right? It's like the responsiveness itself. So in some ways, their skills and the way that they approach life is very impacted by their environment, right? And that's going to be different from ISTP to ISTP. The one thing that is common for these ISTPs or this subtype is that they're not as socially, they don't have as high as social skills as, say, the normalizing or the dominant. So they're just really quirky, right? They're a real quirky ISTP that's really fascinated by complex human problems. And so what are the kinds of careers that are suited for this kind of very idiosyncratic person? Well, if it has a hands-on element, it doesn't require a lot of conventional people skills. It allows them to think of complex human problems, right? That's like a really interesting mix of things required. And so they end up going to things like anthropology, right? That would make sense, right? An anthropologist is somebody who sort of is the center of the Venn diagram of all those quirky interests. Chiropractor is common, documentary filmmaker, herbalist, massage therapist, nutritionist, psychology researcher, shaman, and maybe even hobby club organizer.
Yeah.
So these are things that allow them to, it's almost like it's a desire for the proximity of people without having the people skills necessary to maybe lead or manage, but you're still like like a chiropractor is still dealing with human problems. Yeah. It's the problems of the spine, right? And it's a one-to-one interaction. So you don't have to have the social skills to deal with a whole huge group of people, but you're still solving the person's problem, and you can stay in proximity without having to necessarily, shine it on or be a good conversationalist. So it's like anything that falls in that intersection.
Well, in the same vein, so I'm thinking about chiropractic. There's a competence that's able to be demonstrated, which is very important to ISTPs, to demonstrate competence in whatever skill they've developed. Mm-hmm. There's a container of an appointment for an hour or less to have the interaction happen. So clear boundaries, and the interaction has a purpose to it. So it's got a goal we're trying to achieve by fixing your back or adjusting your back. I mean, I can just think right now of the ISTPs that are attracted to our profiler training program. I think a lot of them probably are this harmonizing style. They love profiling because it's about an hour-long session to talk to another person, really get into what's going on with the other person, but it's got a clear cutoff point. There's a container for it. They can demonstrate competence. Like, it's the perfect solution for a lot of ISTPs into personality type because it creates that container. So I've noticed a trend of the ISTPs that come into our profiler training program tend to be the harmonizing style.
Right.
So I think those are some key characteristics. All right.
There's a couple different things I just want to mention about this type too. Dario mentions that they are almost always into meditation and some form of martial arts. Not necessarily, but it's very common. And these are the ISTPs that are into altered states of consciousness.
These are the ISTPs that Dario hangs out with.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, and, or, there's some ISTPs that are like, I'd rather die than take psychedelics. And others that are like, I've taken every psychedelic. Yeah. So the harmonizing subtype of the ISTP is the most likely to be the one into things like psychedelics, which is why they are introverted, intelligent, super intelligent, usually really good people who have a lot to offer, and sometimes are just a little different, right? They're just a little strange. But they have a lot to offer, this subtype does.
So I think all 4 subtypes have the quality that is common among ISTPs, which is focusing on skill building and competence. I think that would be important for you as an ISTP listening right now. If you're thinking about the career to go toward, or maybe flex the career you're in, competence is going to be at the top of the list. Beyond that, though, you can start to identify, just start to think in terms of the different energies, the different expressions of the ISTP personality, and start to think, okay, I'm more like a creative. I think that would be more my style, is to go toward that. Maybe you're not in a career that lends itself to the subtype that you feel natural toward. The other thing to consider is, remember, ISTP is the type. These are expressions of the type. It doesn't create new types from this. And throughout our life, we can flex and flow into the different expressions of that type. Not only will the subtype you identify with help you choose a career path for your life, or shape that career path, but the career path will also shape you and your subtype.
Right.
So the way you express, maybe you started off life as more of a creative, but your career choice required more of a dominant subtype energy. Over time, you're going to start showing up more like a dominant subtype.
Right.
So the career can actually influence the way you show up to the world.
Yeah.
Which means be very careful which career you choose, because it's going to shape you as a person. I mean, that sounds like common knowledge, but how much attention and time do we put into the way our career affects us and our cognition? Mm-hmm. So just take this right now as an ISTP and just start to think in terms of some of the different, career clusters we talked about with these different subtypes, and ask yourself, is this in alignment with me? Do I feel like this makes sense for me anymore? Is this the career I really would want? And sometimes you've got enough career capital. Like, let's say you're a normalizing subtype and you've spent 2 decades in some job or career. You built a ton of competence. You know what you're doing. It doesn't feel like you, though. You wish you could do something different, maybe more creative or more dominant subtype stuff. But you don't want to give up all of that. You're like, how do I give up 2 decades of competence to start over again and try something new? So that could be a challenge. We get it. We understand. But these are some of the things we want to seed to you as you think about your career going forward.
Yeah. And certain subtypes, everything's a trade-off.
Yeah.
The dominant ISTP tends to be in a better financial position, but they also can get really stressed out and paranoid from it, right? Because anytime they're in a situation where they so often feel certain and confident that when they don't, it's really undermining. And so they're the ones that have the biggest crashes. The normalizing ISTP subtype, they usually bring their expertise to the world, but sometimes they don't always get the highest reward, but they have the most consistency of behavior. And so they might not feel like they might have some need for expressive outlet, right? And something that really... Yeah. Like there's a consistency there. They might not have the highest, when I say highest reward, I mean like highest like personal fulfillment in a normalizing subtype role. So that's the other piece of it, is that's what you trade out. You trade out consistency sometimes for personal fulfillment. Creative subtypes are the opposite. They have a lot of usually personal fulfillment, but sometimes it's hard to bring a career-minded, sort of like bring a financial mind to a creative endeavor. And so they might get really good at what they do, but are they able to stick around long enough to trade their technical, visual, beautiful innovations for the amount of return they should be getting? Yeah. And the harmonizing ISTPs, one of the advantages is that there's an idiosyncratic nature to them. They're a lot less persuaded by how society is set up. This ISTP is okay with being a little off. It doesn't really bother them. Like other ISTPs might feel that sort of distance between themselves and society, but this ISTP is fine with it. They kind of shrug and go, whatever. But the challenge is that they can miss out on reward because they are adjacent to society. So they're not as bothered by it, and that's nice, right? They can build a little life for themselves, but they might miss out on some things that society does have to offer. So it's always a cost-benefit analysis. And what I try to do in looking at these subtypes is figure out what is the thing that I am missing out on, and how do I put myself in a position to be able to develop those skills, sometimes in careers or hobbies or whatever, apply myself to those things to be able to get those rewards and then also be able to land at whatever's most comfortable to me.
Yeah.
So when you're choosing a career, is there a reward you're missing out on? Is it the reward of finances? Is it the reward of consistency? Is it the reward of expression? Is it the reward of being able to just be your own person and not care? What is the thing you're looking for? And the career choice there might be the thing that offers you the ability to grow into that.
Yeah. Okay. So you're an ISTP. You've been listening, watching along. What's coming up for you? We want you to come over and make your voice heard. You haven't had a microphone, but you've been part of this conversation. Now it's time for your voice to be expressed. Come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Ask a question, leave a comment. More importantly, share your story of your career. What is your career story? Are you just starting out right out of university? Have you been in a career for a few years and you're just finding your way at the very early stages of your career? Maybe you've been doing something for decades and you're ready for a change, or you love it and you just want to keep doing it and you just want to get better at it and more proficient. Or maybe you're later in life and you're winding down your career time period. We'd love you to come over and share your career story, maybe some of your ahas or insights that you have, so the community can hear that and have a conversation around it and keep furthering this discussion. Also ask questions if you have those as well. So come over to personalityhacker.com and make your voice heard.
Yeah, and we'll post a link to a booklet that Dario has written. At the time of this recording, I don't think he's written a full book, but he has written a booklet that goes into some of these subtype ideas and gives you a little bit more information on how this theory works. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, it helps us out a lot, and I get some good feedback that keeps me going, and I love hearing from you. So if you leave a rating, would you also please leave a review at the same time? For me, for Antonia Dodge, just for me. You might be watching this on YouTube because we now have the podcast in video form. Go to YouTube and check out Personality Hacker. And if you enjoy our podcast, you can subscribe, and hit the bell that lets you know when a new episode is out. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it in all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And if we have thrown you for a loop and you thought you were an ISTP and now you're starting to question, or if you thought you were a different best fit type and now all of a sudden one of these subtypes is really speaking to you, well, let us be part of your journey in finding your best fit type. Head over to personalityhacker.com and you can take our free online assessment to at least be one node in the system of you figuring out your best fit type. It might begin your journey, it might finally nail it for you, or it might just be one of the things you're doing on the path. But come over, and when you sign up, then you also get notified of new episodes.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us on this episode. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. Hey, it's Joel from Personality Hacker. So a big reason people get into personality types is usually to improve their relationships with other people. And you can understand key differences between you and someone else when you understand how type works. So clearly, personality type is applied to relationships. But what about the relationship with yourself? Well, personality type can also help you navigate your career, or maybe an educational path that you need to follow, or other opportunities that present themselves, and it helps you know which are the right choice for you. And ultimately, personality is the key to unlocking identity-level worldview and life purpose. It all starts with getting the owner's manual for your personality type. In this owner's manual, we cover the basics of your personality. And then we dive a layer deeper to connect your personality to your relationships, your career, your worldview, and identity. Because we believe it's your life, and it should be designed for your personality. So start your owner's manual journey at personalityhacker.com. When you access your owner's manual, I recommend focusing on the ideal day exercise first, because when you start crafting your ideal day, you're being mindful about the type of lifestyle that you want. So designing a life around how you're naturally wired makes sense, and you can finally stop fighting yourself. So come discover and develop your unique personality at personalityhacker.com.